Okay, so like imagine this, all right. You go to buy a car and poof, your favorite brand, it's just gone. They totally missed out on electric cars and now they're history. Sounds kind of wild, right? But this Autoblog article called EV Apocalypse, which brands might not survive the electric revolution. It's saying that's exactly what could happen to a bunch of car companies. We're going to take a deep dive into this article and see which brands might be in trouble and why. We're talking big names and those cool new EV startups, so buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, this is more than just like a tech upgrade. This is a whole industry getting flipped upside down. It's like
Yeah.
a survival of the fittest thing, you know?
Yeah.
These legacy car companies and these EV startups, they got to adapt or they're going to get left behind.
Totally. It's like they're all trying to switch lanes at like 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And some of them are definitely not handling it well. Like the article talks about how legacy car makers are kind of stuck.
Yeah.
They've got these giant factories and systems all built for gas-powered cars, but now they got to figure out how to make electric vehicles too.
It's a classic innovator's dilemma, you know?
Mm.
Do you stick with what you know or do you risk everything for something new? Like the article uses Ford as an example. I mean, the Mustang Mach-E, that was a success. But then they had all those problems with the F-150 Lightning and other EV models got delayed. It hasn't exactly been a smooth transition.
Yeah, not so smooth. And what about Toyota? They were like the kings of hybrids for years.
Yeah.
But their electric cars, they just haven't been that impressive. Do you think they can catch up or is it too late?
Well, Toyota, they built their whole brand on reliability and practicality. But the EV market right now, it's all about speed and innovation. They got to capture people's imaginations with their electric cars,
Yeah.
and they got to do it fast. If they don't, they could end up like the next Blockbuster, you know, a giant company that just completely missed the boat.
Ouch. Yeah, that's not a good comparison. No company wants to be the next blockbuster. But it's not just the old companies that are struggling. The EV startup world is like this crazy roller coaster, full of potential, but also a lot of risks. Like the article mentions Fisker, they went bankrupt. It just shows that even if you have a great idea, you still need to be able to execute it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fisker is a perfect example of why startups need to master manufacturing. It's not enough to just have a brilliant concept. You got to be able to actually build the cars. If you rely too much on other companies to build your cars for you, things can go wrong really quickly.
So you're saying it's super important for EV startups to have their own factories?
It's a huge advantage, especially if you want to grow quickly. Look at Tesla. They invested a ton of money in their own factories. And now they can control production and keep costs down.
That makes sense. All right, let's talk about some specific brands that the article says are in trouble. Let's start with Dodge. They're trying to make an electric version of the Charger. It's called the Charger Daytona, but it's going to be really expensive. Can they really convince their fans who love those big, loud engines to switch to electric, especially if it costs so much?
That's a really interesting challenge. It really shows how brand loyalty is being tested in this EV era. Can Dodge convince their customers that electric doesn't mean giving up power and excitement? They're going to have to work hard to make that argument.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's Rom. They're coming out with the 1500 REV, but this trick is going to be pricey too, something like $58,000 to $85,000. Are regular truck buyers going to be willing to pay that much?
That's the big question. And it highlights something really important that the article talks about, affordability. For EVs to really become mainstream, we got to be affordable for most people. ROM is betting that people will pay extra for the technology in the REV, but it's a risk.
A big risk. Okay, one more brand that caught my eye in the article was Mazda. They basically admitted that their MX-30 was just a compliance car. They just made it to meet regulations, not because they actually believed in it. What does that tell us about Mazda's EV strategy? Are they even serious about this?
It seems like they're playing catch-up, which can be dangerous in this fast-moving market. If Mazda wants to survive, they need to show people they can make an EV that's not just compliant. It has to be something that people actually want to drive.
So we've got legacy brands trying to adapt, startups fighting to survive, and a lot of uncertainty about who's going to come out on top.
The important thing to remember is that this isn't just about which companies survive. It's about the cars we're going to be driving in the future and what that means for the environment and our lives.
Absolutely. This is about way more than just horsepower and fancy tech. It's about the future of transportation.
And that brings us to another group that's facing some tough choices. The consumers.
Whoa, hold on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You've got me on the edge of my seat here. Before we dive into what this all means for us, I want to hear more about the brands that are in this fight.
You're right. Let's get back to those struggling legacy brands. Because the article paints a pretty grim picture for some big names. It says that Lincoln doesn't even have any EVs on the market right now. And Chrysler They're barely hanging on with just one hybrid minivan.
That's rough. Doesn't sound like a recipe for success in the electric world.
And it's not just American brands either. Nissan, they were actually early leaders with the Leaf. But the article says they've lost momentum. The Aria hasn't been the hit they were hoping for. Infinity's even worse off. They don't have any EVs at all, and their sales are plummeting. It just shows how quickly things can change in this industry.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast things are moving. Okay, so things aren't looking good for some of those familiar names, but let's switch gears for a second and talk about some of the brands that are taking a different, maybe even riskier approach to this EV transition. The article mentions Jaguar. They want to go all electric, but they're going to focus on low-volume, high-end vehicles. Is that even a viable strategy in such a competitive market?
It's a bold move, for sure. They're basically betting on exclusivity and appealing to a niche market. We'll have to see if that's enough to keep them afloat. The luxury EV space is already crowded with players like Tesla and Lucid, and now you have these new companies from China entering the market with really aggressively priced cars. Jaguar's going to have to fight hard to stand out.
Yeah. It's like they're trying to create their own little space in the market, but will it be big enough? And what about Land Rover? They're known for those rugged SUVs, but they haven't really done much with electric cars yet. Do you think their parent company, Tata, will give them the money they need to catch up?
That's a tough one. The article isn't so sure, and it's not just Land Rover. Subaru is in a similar situation.
Yeah.
Their current EV is basically just a Toyota with a different badge. The article calls it so-so, at best. If they want to stay competitive, they need to come up with something really innovative, something that will impress their loyal customers and show that they're serious about electric.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of these brands are behind the curve and time is running out. But the article also talks about some EV startups that might not make it. Remember Fisker? They tried to do things the easy way, relying on other companies to build their cars, and it totally backfired. What can other startups learn from that?
Fisker's story is a classic example of why it's so important to control your own destiny, especially in a complex industry like car manufacturing. When you outsource key parts of your operation, you're basically setting yourself up for problems, disruptions, quality issues, things that can quickly derail your plans.
So having your own factories is really important.
It's a huge advantage, especially if you want to scale up production quickly and do it well. Look at Tesla. They went all in on building their own factories, and it's paid off. They can control production, and they've been able to lower their costs.
Speaking of Tesla, the article gives them credit for being a pioneer, but even they're facing some serious competition now, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Hey.
The competition is heating up. Legacy car makers are finally starting to figure out this EV thing. And new companies, especially from China, are coming on strong. Tesla can't just sit back and relax. They need to keep innovating to stay ahead of the game.
This whole conversation is making me think, how much longer will we even be talking about EV startups as a separate category?
That's an interesting question. As the EV market grows, the lines are definitely getting blurred. We're seeing partnerships between traditional car companies and startups. And the competition is becoming less about who's old and who's new, and more about who can make the best car at the best price.
So it's survival of the fittest EV style. This Autoblog article has really given us a lot to think about. It seems like no car brand is safe from all this change happening in the industry.
But all this disruption, while it can be scary, is also really exciting. It's pushing car companies to innovate and rethink how they do things. And that's good for everyone. We're seeing a burst of creativity, and companies are willing to take more risks, which ultimately benefits consumers.
It's like we're watching a changing of the guard. A huge shift in an industry that's been around for over 100 years.
And the winners will be the ones who embrace this change, who understand that the future of cars is electric, and that people want more than just a car. They want an experience that's sustainable, stylish, and packed with technology.
You nailed it. This isn't just about replacing gas with electricity. It's about reimagining what a car can be and how it fits into our lives. But hold on, before we get too carried away with the big picture, let's talk about something that's affecting all of us right now. The price of EVs. The article makes it clear that this is a big factor for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, the technology is cool and all, but at the end of the day, it comes down to money for most people. And the article points out that some brands are having trouble finding that balance between making EVs that people want and making them affordable.
Like the article talks about Mercedes-Benz. They've seen their EV sales drop by something like 30%. That's a big hit, even for a luxury brand.
It's interesting because part of Mercedes-Benz's problem is that they're facing competition from Chinese brands. And it's expensive to make cars in Germany. It just shows how this shift to electric cars is changing the whole global car industry.
And it makes you wonder about another German giant, Volkswagen. They're spending billions on developing EVs, but the article says they haven't really impressed people yet.
The article even says that Volkswagen's future might depend on their factories in China. It's a bold statement, but it shows how much influence China is gaining in the EV market.
And what about Audi? Are they in the same boat as Volkswagen? The article says they're closing their EV factory in Belgium. Makes you wonder if they're shifting their focus to other places, maybe even China.
Yeah, the whole car industry is in a state of change, and these big decisions by major players are going to have a ripple effect. It's a really interesting time to be watching this all unfold.
Okay, let's talk about a brand that's really going all in on electric Porsche. They're betting big on electric versions of the Macan Boxster and Cayman. Do you think those iconic cars can go electric and still be true Porsches?
That's a question of heritage versus innovation. Porsche has a really dedicated fan base, and they're known for performance and handling. They're going to have to convince those fans that an electric Porsche can still deliver that same feeling, that same driving experience.
It's a tough challenge. And they're going to have to compete with those Chinese hyper EVs that are popping up everywhere. And they're often a lot more affordable.
It's going to be a fascinating battle to watch.
Yeah.
And the outcome is going to have a big impact on the future of luxury sports cars.
Yeah.
Will tradition win out, or will the newcomers shake things up?
All right, before we wrap up, I have to ask about one more brand that the article mentions, VinFast. They're a Vietnamese car company trying to break into the U.S. market. But it sounds like they're having a rough time.
The article says their launch in the U.S. has been maybe the worst of any EV brand. It just shows how hard it is to enter a new market, especially one as competitive as the U.S., even if you have a good product.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that in this EV game, there are going to be winners and losers. And some of those losers might be names we never thought would struggle.
But that's what disruption does, right? It shakes things up and creates opportunities for new players to come in, often with new ideas and new ways of doing things. The old rules don't always apply in a market that's changing this fast.
So as we navigate this electric car revolution, it's clear that brand loyalty isn't enough anymore. We as consumers need to be informed, do our research, and make choices that align with what we need and what's important to us.
And remember, this is about more than just cars. It's about creating a more sustainable future for transportation and reducing our impact on the planet. The decisions we make today are going to affect the world we leave for future generations.
Absolutely. This is about building a better future for everyone, and that's something to be excited about. But before we get too philosophical, let's get back to the article and see what else it has to say about the brands that are fighting to survive in this EV revolution.
Okay, so we talked about all the challenges those legacy brands and EV startups are facing, but the article also talks about what this means for us, the drivers. It basically says that the brands that survive this EV thing will be the ones that make cars people actually want to buy. You know, cars that are cool and affordable.
Yeah, which means we, the consumers, have a lot of power. If we don't buy these electric cars, even from the big names, those brands might not be around for much longer. Brand loyalty won't save them if they can't make an EV that people want and can afford.
So you might have to say goodbye to your favorite brand, which is tough for some people. The article doesn't paint a very optimistic picture for some of those big names, like Volkswagen. They're putting a lot of money into EVs, but the article says they haven't really figured out how to make EVs that people get excited about. They even suggest that Volkswagen's future might depend on their factories in China, which is a pretty big deal.
Sounds like it's do or die time for them. So what does all of this mean for us as we're trying to figure out this whole electric car thing?
It means we need to be smart shoppers. Don't just assume that a brand you've always liked will automatically make a great EV. Do your research test, drive different models, and think about things like range charging and, of course, price.
So it's not just about the brand name anymore. It's about finding an EV that fits your life and what's important to you. Maybe you're willing to spend more for a luxury EV with all the fancy features, or maybe you just want something practical and affordable.
Exactly. And that's what makes the EV market so interesting right now. There are so many different options for every kind of person and every budget. We're seeing everything from small city cars to big off-road SUVs, and the technology is changing so fast.
It's a really exciting time to be into cars, even if it's a little overwhelming. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
The EV revolution is happening, and it's changing everything about the car world. Don't be afraid to embrace the change, explore the options, and be open to new things. The future of driving is electric, and it's full of potential.
Well said. I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the EV revolution. It's clear that the road ahead is going to be electrifying, and we can't wait to see what the future holds. So buckle up, everyone, and get ready for the ride.